Lovely day out, I reckon.
Now then, I have a very confused relationship with the genre of cyberpunk. No, not with my father, no, that's my ex. No, with cyberpunk. Now I get that sounds a little bit weird because you're probably going, cyberpunk? Isn't that like an aesthetic or game? Yes, but, well, before those things, cyberpunk was a genre, specifically a offshoot genre of science fiction, and more specifically, dystopian fiction. Practically, it's defined as a work of just two elements, high-tech and low-life, a very high development or level of technology, and a very low standard of life for most of its inhabitants. Now, whilst foundational works like Blade Runner also set other conventions, like, for instance, all of the neon lights and it's constantly raining for some reason, you only really need these two elements in order for it to be cyberpunk. What most people consider to be the first work in the genre is William Gibson's Neuromancer, a story following a talented hacker who is hired, more coerced, by an ex-military colonel who is working for a AI called Wintermute, used by the ultra-wealthy in this world, who wants to reunite with the other half of his superintelligence, the titular Neuromancer. You can already see a lot of the conventions of the genre already present in this story, but that's mostly because Neuromancer isn't actually the first cyberpunk story. Whilst it is the story which coined the term, most of the lingo, and brought the genre to mainstream attention, most people would actually credit the 1927 film Metropolis as being the truly first piece of cyberpunk fiction, as Metropolis fundamentally and perfectly embodies the high-tech and low-life elements of the genre. It's also part of the other third inherent part of cyberpunk, inequality. Cyberpunk, quite literally, is built on inequality. You can't have all of the crazy sci-fi crap without having immense resources, and you can't be poor and living in squalor if you have immense resources. So, inherently, someone has to be holding all of the chips, and someone else has to lose. It's inherently a political genre of fiction. It quite literally cannot exist without having a ruling class, which is oppressing the majority of the people. And so, cyberpunk and the many evil megacorporations present in a lot of its stories are inherently inseparable. Cyberpunk, in order to be cyberpunk, has to inherently be a criticism of the consolidation of wealth, late-stage capitalism, corruption, monopolistic business practices, and the exploitation of the majority for the benefit of the minority. And of course, the weaponization of technology to achieve this. There are no two ways around it. For a setting to be cyberpunk, it must be making a statement. Whether or not that statement is about what is truly human, like in Blade Runner or Ghost in the Shell, the breakdown of civilized society in Judge Dredd, the corruption or folly of man in Akira, or the greed and unchecked power of megacorporations in Hard Space Shipbreaker, it inherently needs to take some sort of a stance on an issue. Which is why I have such a difficult time grasping what has happened to the genre as it has been increasingly boiled down to just an aesthetic. It's just all like, ooh, look, neon lights, ooh, rainy cities, ooh, people with cybernetic implants, blah 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 blah. It's why the cities in The Creator look incredibly cyberpunk in aesthetic, but are really just treated as though they're real utopias, I guess, is kind of what they're getting at, because the whole argument that the film is making is that the Asian nations who are living in harmony with the Asian nations who are living in harmony with the machines are way better off than the Western ones. It kind of feels like they're missing the point, eh? Now, that's not to say there's anything inherently wrong with just using an aesthetic and just treating it like that, but if you want to call something cyberpunk, you kind of need to embody all of the weird, gritty, political parts that are inherent to the genre. And I think that's why a lot of cyberpunk media recently has just been turned into just an aesthetic, is because the people who run all of the big media corporations in this world obviously don't want to make media that inherently calls out their monopolistic business practices. Disney. What has been co-opted by Mr. Government Efficiency, wholesome chungus, totally not a neo-Nazi, and ethnic cleansing appreciator, Mr. Elon Musk, with his whole Cybertruck shtick. Which, let's be so real here, the damn thing looks like it would be driven by a corporate militia in a cyberpunk world, you know, not a car of the people like it was advertised to be. Admittedly, a really stupid corporate militia because it's fucking shit car, but anyway. And honestly, you can take this whole boiling down to an aesthetic, or boiling down to the inoffensive parts, and just apply this to all of dystopian fiction. I take YA dystopian novels, like The Hunger Games. Like, what's the point being made here? I'm really seriously trying to figure out exactly what message this series is trying to tell besides don't tolerate oppression. And yeah, it's supposed to be a criticism of the American system, but it's just so broad that it's not actually picking a fight with anyone specifically and not really making any sort of a point. Or fucking Uglies, you know, a story about confronting societal expectations, specifically beauty ones, and just generally the status quo, which, yeah, on paper sounds like a decent idea, but it's handled in such a bullshit, edgy, year 8 girl way that it just comes across as comical. Comparing this to the genre's forebearers like George Orwell's 1984, Huxley's Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451 and The Rocket by Ray Bradbury, it's kind of crazy just to look at the comparison. All of the biting satire and political commentary, and the distinct evils and powers singled out not for their arbitrary ability to make us sad, but because they pose critical threats to our way of life, our freedom, and our path to a more enlightened world with less suffering. I'll never really be able to get over just how well Orwell's observations about totalitarianism and fascism hold up even today, how he identified the same tricks being used by the Nazi and Stalinist regimes of his day in the so-called free countries of the world, and just the fact that not only was he right and that the same tricks are being employed by similar powers even today, but generally how hilarious and ironic it is that we seem to have entirely forgotten and moved right on, creating dystopias which no longer hold that biting edge, and cyberpunk worlds which lack their fundamental critiques of injustice and inequality. Our entertainment industry endlessly removes all meaning from itself, serving only to create mindless, escapist nonsense. Now, I'm not saying the Electric State movie is exactly that. It's an average movie, but that's its problem. Lack of meaning and care is exactly what robbed it of being something much better.
I swallow all my drugs so the penis unplugged. When the laws of entropy touch, you better dread the judge. Wiser men than us been crushed to find dust. When a fortune cookie dummy unfucked, I just shrug. A note like a broken electrical pole song. But a done for the scum of the circuitry on the run. Haven't seen the sun.
And I'm back inside. Now, for those unaware, the Electric State film is in fact based on a book by Simon Stålenhag, a well-renowned Swedish artist, author and musician, behind other stories like Tales from the Loop and its unadapted sequel, Things from the Flood, the horrifying look at secular culture and just, you know, the horrifying story in general, The Labyrinth, his upcoming book, Sunset at Zero Point, that I preferred when it was called Europa Meccano, but that's just me, and yes, The Electric State. And yes, I do own all of his books. I think Stålenhag is as talented as an artist as he is a writer, who has, over the course of his career, fine-tuned both skills to a perfect balance, producing some of the most interesting stories I've ever read. His mastery over not only creating artwork with a very, very specific feeling that it's damn near impossible to replicate, which I will get into later, but also just really beautiful, sophisticated pieces is unbelievable, and his ability to handle all aspects of great writing, whether it be subtlety, setup and payoff, plot structure, and just the ability to create interesting ideas and phrases is something to be celebrated. The Electric State, the book that is, has literally one of the best, most interesting, chilling and enticing opening paragraphs to a book I've ever read. Second, of course, to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I mean, let's be real here. No mortal is ever topping Hunter S. Thompson with We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold. Funny how both of these stories actually feature Barstow as a location. Anyway, The Electric State is, after all, one of my favourite books of all time, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who wanted more from the movie, or if you wished it had gone in a different direction, I'd urge you to go read it. Granted, if you want to, probably click off and do that now. I am going to spoil it. And if you want a simpler breakdown and just to get a good feel for it, Curious Archive has made a great series on all of Stålenhag's books, and I'd recommend checking his Electric State one out. Now, before I hear anyone say this, of course, yes, this is just an opinion, I'm not forcing you to think anything, blah 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 blah. If you need to have someone to tell you their opinion is an opinion to prevent you from having a tantrum, you need to chill. Now, I do love The Electric State as a book, and when I heard it was going in a very different direction to the film, I knew obviously not to expect the same thing. That's to say, I didn't go into this wanting to dislike it. Whilst the Russos have made some real stinkers before, their work in the MCU is no doubt successful. Thing is though, I really didn't expect just how different this film was going to be compared to the book. It's so different, in fact, that I don't actually think it's even really an adaptation of the book. And in order to explain why, we're going to need to break down these two works. Not technically speaking though, no, I'm sure there are plenty of videos already out there, and will be out there, absolutely tearing apart the dialogue, plot structure, pacing, uninspired action sequences, wacky casting choices, and just general lack of soul and direction in this film. This is not a video about that. Nor is it a review of the movie, or a diss of it. I don't think it deserves a diss, to be completely honest, or even the Rotten Tomatoes score that it's managed to get. This is a video about the macro decisions that happened early on in this film's production, which fated it to not reach the heights it could have, and the broader trends of the industry at large which robbed it of full creative realisation. So first, let's compare and contrast these two stories. The Electric State book opens with lyrics from the Psychedelic Furs, and then this. The war had been fought and won by drone pilots, men and women in control rooms far from the battlefields, where unmanned machines fought each other in a strategy game played over 7 years. And no, this was not a war between man and robots. There are no robots in the book, only drones. This was an American Civil War, which... The pilots of the Federal Army had lived a good life in brand new suburbs where they could choose from 30 kinds of cereal on their way home from work. The drone technology was praised because it spared us the meaningless loss of life. The collateral damage was of two kinds: the civilians unfortunate enough to be caught in the crossfire, and the children of the Federal pilots who, as a concession to the godheads of defense technology, were all stillborn. We get a brief advertisement for the Mode 6, and then a dusty desert, littered with neurocaster-donned corpses, and a quote about the dust: lighthouse keepers, and going insane in the static. The Electric State movie, on the other hand, opens with a kid doing a test, who pretends as though he's stumped and stuck on something, at which point the teacher goes, "Stuck?" And then the kid goes, "No, I'm done." He didn't say it like that. Before cutting outside to his sister, Michelle, Millie Bobby Brown's character, going, "That test took Einstein 3 days." They then proceeded to do the most unnatural description of how smart her brother is, which you kind of already established that anyway. Before eventually saying stuff like, "You could change the world, and with technology, our consciousness could transcend physical boundaries." Landed on a bit thick, don't you think, there, lads? Like, with the exposition, I mean. Now, that's just the start, but this lack of subtlety, it's indicative of a lot of the film. Now, sure, like most things that I take pot shots, I guess you could say, at with this channel, it's average. It's watchable. I didn't get bored or particularly hate watching it, and, you know, it was a pleasant enough way to spend 2 hours. And if you're just looking for a fun family adventure, yeah, I'd recommend it. I mean, before we get started on those who want more out of their media, though, I certainly do think it needed a few more drafts of the script just to iron out all the inconsistencies, plot holes, fucking stupid fake-out deaths. Why? I hate those in movies. Uninteresting scene construction, and just, yeah, the dialogue as a whole. It does very much feel like a first draft and not a final version, and there are loads of minor things that needed to have been sorted out. It's also a little uninspired, especially in the music and sound design department, and just, yeah, I couldn't go the whole video without at least saying that. But these things aren't really why I don't like the movie. The problem with the Electric State is that it could have been a lot more. Now, some people like to act like accuracy is the most important part of an adaptation, that sticking to the source material is the only metric on which to be judged. They're wrong. Very, very, very wrong. Judging a piece of media based on how similar it is to its original work is not a valid metric of criticism. And I think in a lot of cases that for adaptations to succeed, they need to be different to their source material in varying levels of capacity. After all, different mediums of art have different strengths and weaknesses, and certain stories only work in a certain way in their original medium. Obviously, stuff would need to be changed in order to adapt the Electric State into a film. The structure and order of events would certainly need a rethink, and the way the book relies on narration would require some reworking to properly sell a narrative film. The thing is that the Electric State movie doesn't just change things. It ignores its source material beyond a few superficial elements and trying to imitate its art style. Now, I must say imitating. Anyone who's properly experienced Stålenhag's art in the flesh knows it has such a weird, ethereal quality that just showing it on a screen doesn't convey it. It gives such a weird mix of emotions, and it would take a very, very specific directing and cinematographic style to get that to work on the silver screen. So I don't really blame the Electric State for not nailing that. After all, I don't think it was something that the Russos were going to be quite up to snuff for. But besides a few little notions, the occasional background set piece, and a few pieces of technology in the Center Corporation, which has been altered fundamentally in the movie as well, the Electric State, as a film, is completely different to its source material. Center, in the movie, is headed by Ethan Skate, a tech billionaire who wants to alleviate all suffering from mankind through digital dreams and sees sacrificing a child for that to be a worthy price, which, what tech billionaire on Earth actually cares about that? Be honest here. And in the film as well, the Neurocasters are more or less just a way for people to pilot Center robots who perform various jobs that we never see them doing besides the teacher, but we're told about it. In the book, however, Center is a faceless, huge megacorporation, willfully ignorant to the harm they're doing to mankind in pursuit of profit. And the Neurocasters, whilst originally devised in the American Civil War, second fictional one, as an advanced joystick to control huge drones more akin to flying aircraft carriers. Their ability to interface directly with the entire human mind and allow it to transcend into a digital cloud is used as a form of mass entertainment. A very, very addictive form of mass entertainment, solely consuming the post-war nation. In the movie, the road trip is a short montage, a somewhat uninteresting fight scene, getting carried by a robot, and then boom, we're here. In the book, the entire story is the road trip, beginning in the Blackwell Badlands, a ruined desert covered in nothing but dust and corpses, covering the entire middle of the United States, caused by the weapons used in the war. Through the Mojave Desert, littered with lawless towns slowly decomposing, over the mountains and down into central California, where cities still exist, but mobs of people stuck in neuronic daydreams wander fields mindlessly, like nocturnal animals. And then out to Cape Hope and Point Linton, where, well, we'll get into that. The movie is told predominantly through what is happening in the present moment, with some flashbacks to Christopher, and is littered with quippy, fun characters spitting one-liners. The book does follow Michelle through the present day, but only 3 of the story's characters exist in this time. Michelle, Skip, and Walter, a man sent presumably by the government or some sort of organisation of that sort to find a child very important to a group known as the Convergence. Most of the actual story, the text not the images, follows Michelle's past, how her brother was born from an unknown father but had many medical complications and dozens of surgeries, how her mother, a veteran drone pilot from the war, was let down by her nation and its services and lived in poverty before she died in a trailer park. How Christopher was taken by CPS, and Michelle was adopted by Ted and Bridget. Ted, who Michelle got along with very well, in stark contrast to the movie. Ted is just a fucking dick. In the book, he's actually a decent father. But Bridget was a bit of a bitch. It then follows Michelle's relationship with Amanda. Yes, I know, lesbians, and her experience as society eventually breaks down in a town of Soest under the weight of the Neurocaster addiction, as her adopted mother drowns in their pool but stays alive right up until the caster is disconnected. How Ted's hormones are put completely out of whack, and he begins to lactate when plugged into the neural network, and after his wife's death, the slow breakdown of law and order in his town, heads out to the riverside, still plugged into his Neurocaster, where he's picked to death by vultures and never wakes up. And then finally, after this, how Skip arrives one day, offering a Michelle on the brink of suicide a way to find her brother. The movie ends with a big climactic battle, and Michelle unplugging her brother from the center machinery because they run their entire system through one human brain. Seemed like a bit of a bottleneck to me, to be completely honest. Anyway, and then she gives a awe-inspiring, kind of tacked-on and boring speech about freedom.
Don't be racist, I am a building.
The book, however, as Michelle and Skip get further outside of San Francisco and along the Cape, the hollow core of civilization has caved in. The rambling about the nature of consciousness in the narration compounds, and it becomes clear that something deep in the network has gone terribly wrong. As Walter closes in, Michelle comes across police cars sitting idly on the road, with no officers around and bullet casings littering the ground. Things only get furthermore unsettling until the crowds of Neurocaster-donned masses stop being quite so mindless and now walk in a devoted tandem, following gigantic, homemade, horrific mechanical gods to which they are all connected to, part flesh and part machine, rising from the ground as though they are mechanized fetuses, and we are finally filled in on events during the war. Due to the Neurocaster's ability to sustain the human consciousness even in the absence of their physical body, many consciousnesses fused together inside the neurographic network during the war, forming the Convergence, an intracerebral intelligence trying to create a perfect non-human genome, leading to all the stillborn births during the war, the madness on the Charlton Island base, and the birth of Michelle's brother. It is also responsible for the addictive nature of the Neurocasters, as man becomes one with machine, and this dystopian consumerist world slowly turns into downright post-apocalypse. And this eerie, retro-futuristic story slowly turns into full-on sci-fi surrealist horror. At the end, Michelle reaches where her brother is, still logged into his Neurocaster, using it to control the bot, and is presumably dead, besides his connection to the network. As Walter closes in to finally get rid of him, to prevent the Convergence from spreading his non-human genes and heralding the end of modern mankind, a gigantic drone is birthed from the soil, and we guess it destroys him. Michelle laments on how there is no way back now, the roads may be impassable soon, and that they realize the inevitable, that we no longer live in civilized times. Michelle then finally takes her brother down to the beach to remove the Neurocaster, and we are shown nothing but images of the car, the drone, and said Neurocaster, left abandoned on the sand. Do you see how potentially these two works are not the same story? Now, I get a lot of the less artistically minded of you may think that the Electric State book is just some artsy-fartsy rambling, and that media should be straightforward, treat me like I'm a baby, and be nothing but entertainment and escapist nonsense. To anyone who thinks this, you are an idiot, objectively. Art, fundamentally, is a reflection of the society and culture in which it was created, like how ancient Greek theatre was political and driven by the gods coming from the first democratic society who held on to great superstitions, or how Renaissance artwork is bolder and more sophisticated than its forebearers, coinciding with the era's renewed optimism and technological and social development. Or how art became more surrealist after the invention of the camera. Even on a shorter timescale, this is true. The 90s had films like Office Space and Fight Club as a reaction to their stability and heavily corporatized culture of the decade. The 80s were rambunctious and birthed the blockbuster, spurred by economic prosperity and optimism. And the noughts often had works which were cynical towards the government and critiqued unnecessary wars fought over false pretexts, relating directly to the war in the Middle East. When historians look back at our era and see nothing but escapist crap, they'll be able to infer that this was a time when shit was properly hitting the fan, and that people were pussies who wanted to stick their heads in the sand and act like it wasn't happening, rather than challenging the status quo. I'm not, of course, saying that all escapist work is indicative of that, I just mean as in how prevalent it's become, and the expectation of things within the mainstream to be simplistic and escapist reflects this. And this lack of willingness to address or combat the issues of our age has hit one genre of works particularly hard, and that is dystopian fiction. People not willing to confront our society's problems head-on with new solutions or just do anything besides what we've always done has meant that big studios have thought that something genuinely picking holes in our current system and saying, hey, maybe we should fix this, would go down poorly with consumers. And this, coupled with modern Hollywood's inability to ever make a new bloody IP and always needing to recycle or reboot or adapt everything brought to the silver screen, has led to many dystopian stories like The Electric State being sanitized, made inoffensive and escapist, and having all of the grit and commentary inherent to its genre be stripped right off in favour of generic, plot-hole-ridden, incredibly budgetarily bloated slop. Just pure mindless entertainment. And that's the failing of The Electric State in movie form. Rather than being a thought-provoking, intensely captivating and horrifying look into what may happen when man messes with technology beyond his comprehension, steals fire from the gods, shall we say, and lets consumerism and addiction control him and his society, well, instead we got something that's just meant to be consumed. We got the artistic equivalent of junk food. Now, this isn't bad per se. I don't mind a cheeky bit of fast food every now and again, like, dude, I'm not made of stone. A nice Zinger box is bloody fucking delicious. But most of the time, I at least try to eat well. I'll always prefer a nice, classy restaurant meal made with more time and effort than just a fast food burger. Heck, I love really well-made burgers and steaks. Like, I'm not even someone who often goes for that really highbrow, ultra-fancy crap. I usually just prefer a good kebab. But what I care about is that said kebab is well made. That it comes from a place where I can't understand a word the employees are saying, the sign is fading, and has a huge Coke ad on the side of it. I care that it's authentic, it's well made, and it's tasty. Like, imagine how annoyed you'd be if you were expecting a delicious rack of sumptuous glazed ribs from a steakhouse that all of your mates had recommended, and then the bloody waiter shows up with a McChicken. That's the Electric State movie. On its own, it's just another forgettable, fun enough, average, but admittedly very good-looking film. I can just see the suffering of the poor VFX artists in every frame and dollar of the budget. But when judged against what it's based on, it's all of a sudden so much worse. It's not the same story at all. It's not even an adaptation of that story. It's just the sanitized, bog-standard, Hollywoodized version of that story, and like many others, it's a dystopia without any real message. I do hope, one day, that someone else gets the rights to this movie, and it gets its own treatment, not too dissimilar from Dread 2012, a film I've already made a video about, and a director who truly enjoys the original story and has the chops to make something decent out of it gets signed on. A cast and crew dedicated to the work get involved. A budget more befitting of something like this is set, not $320 goddamn million, and a music composer who really understands the vibe gets involved, which, heck, you could probably get Stålenhag himself to do that. His album for The Electric State is already perfect for it. And finally, the mistakes of this current movie can be rectified. Something far more interesting can be produced, and that Hollywood, finally, can go back to making dystopias that don't completely suck. Thank you. I've been filmed by Stace.
Unshaken, amid Mr. Crash of world. May I stand unshaken amid Mr. Crash of world.